But anyway, carnivorous plants do not like go around eating stuff. Yes. It's mostly like flies and insects. They are not getting their main nutrition from what they're eating. They're still photosynthetic. So they're getting all their carbs from that. These are, you have parasitic plants like in the rainforest where the soil is very nutrient poor. If you're a rainforest plant, everybody thinks it's so great in the rainforest. They get a lot of rain, get sunlight and everything, but they're not, all the big trees suck up all the nutrients out of the soil. So the soil, again, like I already said, is very nutrient poor. So some of these smaller plants are adapted to living in the rainforest by being carnivorous. So they can get their nitrogen from like flies and all kinds of insects. There's pitcher plants, and have you ever seen pitcher plants? They're just kind of shaped almost like a tube, and they put like a smell that attracts like insects. The insects fly in, but they can't fly out. They're like sticky inside, and then they secrete enzymes that digest whatever flies in there, and then they get nitrogen.
Yeah.
Venus flytraps, I was so unimpressed when I actually saw the first one for real. I expected
I know, they're like
something
small and they die.
Yeah. They're not usually big. In the rainforest they can be big, but
Are they like super slow? Like they're like
yeah.
Yeah.
It's actually osmosis that closes them. So like when the fly flies in or whatever, when it lands, it triggers the movement of water, and like it just goes. Yeah. So when I first saw them, it was at the botanical garden, and they had like a pot of them that you could. So I was like, take a grass blade and like stick it in there. Anyway, I was bored that day. My husband was at a meeting, and I was like, what am I going to do in Atlanta by myself?
They had that really smelly flowers.
Stick grass and Venus flytraps. Huh?
They had that really smelly flowers.
It would be fun,
No, the one that smells like rotting meat. Yeah. They didn't have any of the botanical gardens.
How was that like positive?
It attracts flies, and I think they're carnivorous, same thing. So then that yeah, it smells, they say it really smells like rotting meat. Okay, last thing guys, is tying this together with farming practices. Again, farming is not natural and takes all the nutrients out of the soil. So you have to use fertilizers, and we already said this because somebody asked me, and that's the problem with fertilizers. They're perfectly good for the plants, but they do wash away because you're putting on top. So there's been a lot of interest in doing more environmental farming, because people are realizing if that's your livelihood, you want to grow the most crops and get the most money, but also if you can only do that for a few years and then your land is ruined, then it's not. You have to do. They're calling it sustainable farming, so that you can make. You can get crops like year after year after year. So just a few things that they're doing. Well, natural fertilizers are obviously better, but they're more expensive than synthetic fertilizers. People have been doing crop rotation for years, but one of the things that they're starting to do now is say plant a field of soybeans, even if they don't want to grow soybeans, and then plow them under at the end of the year, so they don't even sell them. So they lose money that year, but remember with soybeans, they have that symbiotic relationship with the rhizobium, and so they actually, when you plow them under, it puts a lot of nitrogen in the soil, and you don't need to fertilize. So it's a more sustainable way of returning the nitrogen to the soil, but it costs you money, because then that field, whatever year you plant that with soybeans and plow them under, you're not making any money out of that. So I think it's always like a big, push-pull with the money thing. The other thing is, obviously, crops suck all the water out of the soil. So we're growing plants in places that don't have water, and that's probably not very smart. A lot of people don't live there, so it seems to be a good place to grow crops, except when you think about there's no water. I took an environmental geology class only because I had to. But it ended up being interesting. And what the guy was saying, what we don't realize is, like, you take places like Las Vegas, that's a desert, and then you have people go there, and there's large giant fountains with water, and places with grass even that they water like crazy. But what's happening is all that water's coming from somewhere. And we're taking them out of underground aquifers for the most part. And that's like basically spaces in the rock under the ground where water can collect. The problem that I learned is that when you suck all the water out of there, those spaces collapse. And so when they collapse, now you actually have less space for the water to collect. And so like over time, you've actually even lose the ability to get any water, to ever recover water from that area again. So we're causing some really big problems. A lot of farmers are irrigating with salty water because it's easier to get. And the problem with that, of course, is that once you irrigate, even when the plants take up the water, when the water evaporates, it leaves salt in the soil. So even when you put more water there, now what happens? It's hypertonic outside the roots, so what's going to happen? Yeah, the water is actually going to come out of the roots instead of going in, and all your plants are going to die. So once your soil becomes salty, it's completely ruined. It's very hard to get the salt out of the soil once you get it there, so that's really bad. And the other thing is, we're losing lots and lots of topsoil, and anything that was organic in it is going to wash away. And the big thing, you don't see it as much anymore. Like where I grew up, there was a lot of farms. So you drive, and like in the off season after the harvest, you used to see like the fields look kind of like you'd have maybe some grassy areas, but then it was completely dirt, just like clean. You could see the little rows where they went and harvested stuff. They're trying not to ever do that anymore. If they just leave the stuff, like, you know, you harvest corn and then you got all those little dried stalks, the idea is leave it there because it holds the soil in place, and don't plow it under until right when you're going to plant your crops the next year, and that's going to be a little bit better. So that's one of the things that they're doing. Contour farming is like if you have some hills, like you can make it circular, you can do various things to prevent the water from running off. The big thing is we plant our crops in rows. If you're a farmer, actually I have a friend that still farms, it's easier to harvest, right? Then you just get your giant combine or whatever it is, like drive down there and pick all your stuff. If it's not in rows, it's really, really hard to harvest. You can't harvest with machines very well, but when you have rows, then you have areas where water can run off and take all the soil away. So there's all these issues to deal with. So as I said, a lot of farmers are not plowing, they're not planting in rows, or they plant, some stuff doesn't grow well in rows, so maybe alternate and grow some of that kind of stuff. Or plant some stuff, if you've seen a lot of times farmland, they'll plant grass. Sometimes alternate, because grass traps a lot of soil that's blowing in the air because it's a monocot, which has fibrous roots. So that can really help. So we're trying to do something to make farming more sustainable, because otherwise we're not going to have any land that we can grow crops on anymore. It's going to be all big issue. So that's it. I told you it was quick. Questions?